Greetings. Once again, back. This time we're going to be talking about Max Weber and this idea of rationalization. Once again, um, these are all kind of foundational social theories that form the basis of more advanced social theories that we get in the 20th century. All of these are just takes on how society is organized and how power is shared and or not shared in society. The person we're talking about right now, of course, is Max Weber, a German sociologist, and it's pronounced Weber and not Weber. I've had people make that mistake, but don't worry, it's cool. But just know it's Max Weber. Max Weber is responsible for a lot of what we see in today's understanding of education, but also for providing us this understanding of what we call rationalization. And essentially what rationalization is it comes at a time where society's shifting from more religious, kind of agrarian society to a more structured, scientific, industrial society. And we're trying to make sense of reality during this time. So we have to wonder about how leadership is established, how order and rules are set, things like that. And what rationalization is this movement from this kind of mystical, magical understanding of society to a more methodical, scientific, more calculated process. It's also the link between Protestantism and capitalism, with Protestantism focusing on piousness and self-regulation, and capitalism focusing on production. So if you put both of those together, although they sound like they don't mix, if you think about society and how we are telling workers to work and actually work to the detriment of their humanity, what we've made is a person who's a good worker feels more, I guess, closer to religious purity, closer to God, so to speak, by the work that they do. And that works very well for owners of production because they can also say, I'm helping you become a better person by giving you manual labor. And if you think about that, that's an interpretation we've heard before in American society. But Weber also pushes an idea of Verstehen. It's German, which simply means that meaning in life, is derived from the human interpretation of acts or action. So we get meaning by watching and observing and learning from that. And what he advances is this idea of bureaucracy. You've undoubtedly heard of the term bureaucracy before, and most of the time it has a very negative connotation to it. But essentially what bureaucracy is a hierarchy of decision making, designed to actually take out the impersonal, the personal, emotional parts of rules. And what's important about that is that we move from this idea of having kings who were judge, jury, and executioner to having a process by which justice and decisions and rules can be thought through, tested out, and then made to sure that it doesn't harm the majority of people. A king could be mad one day and anyone who comes across him, it's off with your head. But we go through a process, through the bureaucratic process, to make sure that those rules are in place. And here's how it can work. Say, for example, you are a math teacher inside of the math department at a school. You have an innovative idea, but you just can't put it in place, or else you'll get slapped in your hand for going outside of the standard curriculum and things like that. So what you do is you take it to your department chair, the first form of bureaucracy within your group. That department chair takes it to their dean of a university. The dean will then hear it, kind of comb through it, go back and forth, decide what part's worth going to the next level. That may go to the provost of the college. And the college provost will hear it, say, that's a great idea. Let's get it formally written up. It's formally written up probably again, and then goes to the president of the university and signed off on, and it becomes rule or becomes a practice. That's a hierarchy, or what we call bureaucracy. Now, that process could take a year and a half. That's the one thing we know about bureaucracies is it takes time to go up the chain and then back down the chain to actually where it can be implemented. But bureaucracy is designed to maintain a social order, to standardize the process, And also it actually is based upon this idea of specialization. If you think of any organization, organizations have people in certain areas that specialize in one thing. For example, in a business, you may have a human resources department where that's what they do. You have an accounting, a marketing, finance department, procurement department. All of those things are specialized roles that they have. If you go to schools, particularly public schools, you have department chairs of particular disciplines. You have an administrator who is over a particular set of disciplines. You have a principal. You have a zone superintendent. You have a superintendent. You have assistant superintendents. You have all of these roles and specializations that becomes part of this hierarchy by which decisions are made. So what Weber is also most famously known for is an understanding of how power is legitimated, how we make a person in power legitimate. And it has two central elements to it. One is the perception of legitimacy, and the second one is administrative barrier. On the perception of legitimacy, we talked about this before with status congruence. And status groups is what Weber is also known for writing about. But we have to be able to see you and believe you as a leader, which means you have to have proven yourself in some kind of way to be looked at as a leader, whether it is your personality, whether it is a relationship you have, or whether it's who you are connected to. The second part is administrative barriers. And what we've created in society are barriers by which a person has to pass through to actually be seen as a legitimate leader. Let's say, for example, the principal of a school or even the president of a college, we know that they've earned a certain educational attainment. And that educational attainment legitimates them as a leader, although it hasn't said that they've actually had some success as a leader. It just says that based on those criteria, they pass through particular barriers in order to be qualified as a legitimate leader. But that is the same thing for gangs. It's the same thing for the highest office in the land. We have these administrative barriers and we have perceptions of legitimacy. Somebody perceives your current president as a legitimate leader. And he's also, through the Constitution, passed through those administrative barriers in order to qualify for that. So that is the same for presidents, but also even for gangs. You take a gang of a set of a neighborhood, somebody in that particular group is looked at as a leader. And it could be because of who their cousin was. It could be because of just connections that they have. It could be because they are the loudest person there. And they're perceived as a leader because their voice is heard above everyone else's. And they've also passed through particular barriers in order to earn the right to be called that. If they arrive to the status of what we call OGs, they have done enough work throughout their life to where they are regarded as a leader and they're respected as such. And how people become leaders depends on three types of leadership characteristics. The first one is charismatic leaders. Charismatic leaders generally have the personality, the oratorical skills, the charm, the relationships to be legitimated as leaders. For example, Dr. King, after the bus boycotts in Montgomery, ascended to the level of leadership based upon his charismatic personality. His oratorical skills accelerated his leadership to be called the actual leader of the civil rights movement. You also have traditional types of leaders. And what we mean by traditional is the divine right of kings. You are in leadership because of who your family is or because God has ordained you and your family as legitimate leaders. You could be the Robinson of the Robinsons of Scottsdale, so to speak. But even in, let's say, Europe, particularly England, you are legitimated through leaders by who your family name is. So the Windsors actually are legitimated leaders because they are in the Windsor family. The last one is rational legal. You are the leader because you have, one, accomplished all of the administrative barriers to be legitimate as a leader, and you have proven successful outcomes. So we give leadership to the people who do things the right way and do them well. So that is another form of how we legitimate leadership through rational legal. So you can have charismatic personality, which is particularly the perception of legitimacy. You can have traditional, which is more perception of legitimacy, and then rational leader, which is a little more on administrative barrier and less on the perception of legitimacy. Next is Weber in schooling. Schools are looked at as bureaucratic systems. We talked about this a little earlier, but we'll go a little deeper now. In most schools, you have this idea of specialization, and your specialization is generally given to you by your certification. So if you are a math teacher, you are certified to actually be in that position, and that separates you from everybody else. If you're a school psychologist, you have certifications that qualify you to be in that particular role. And that creates another barrier of administration or bureaucracy. We also have processes. How we keep records is a bureaucratic way of doing things. We do everything in kind of a similar way so that if the next person comes in, they can easily come in, see your process, and then keep moving without having to relearn a system or recreate a system all over again. Even with standardization of curriculum, is based on bureaucratic principles. And I've heard principals say this. I thought it was the dumbest thing ever, but I was told that if I'm coming into your economics class and it's a 90-minute economics class, and I got to see 3 teachers in that same time block, I should be able to spend the first 30 minutes in your class, the next 30 minutes in another class, and the last 30 minutes in another class and get the same lesson. I thought that was crazy because it ignores my particular personal contribution to the subject. But that is an understanding of bureaucracy and standardization of curriculum. Also, bureaucracy is also done in the way that we have time allocated, how we design our meetings, the time and place which we put on meetings, generally Wednesdays, right after school. But even during the time of the day, we live by the bell. We actually mark time by bells. So children may come into school, go into the cafeteria or to the gym, and wait for the first bell. The first bell tells you go to class. Then you have a 1-minute warning bell, and then the final bell, you have to be in class. You stay in that class for 90 minutes, a bell rings, you get up, you leave, and then you do this process all day long until you get the final bell to go to the buses. But we allocate time based upon this idea of bureaucracy. Also, we talk about the division of labor based on your training and responsibility. We actually create status groups based upon your level of training, and training could be experience in the building and responsibilities. Let's say compensation is done this way. I had a teacher one time, dynamic first-year teacher, literally teaching rings around everyone in the building, but she was the lowest paid person in the building because she was new. Meanwhile, I had another teacher, probably one of the most ineffective teachers I've ever seen in my life. And she was probably the second highest paid person in the building behind the principal. And that was only like $4,000 difference. But she was given that because she was 27 years in the profession. So because of that, because we honor her time, we paid her more regardless of her output. In any school district, minor school district will make this plain. We have salary scales. And salary scales, you get steps based on years in service. And what we used to have was a different scale depending on your level of education. So we paid you for your master's, you moved to the master's scale, and then master's 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10 years. And then you can move to the doctoral scale and you get a whole different pay based on that. But that's a level of bureaucracy that we have in schools. Schools are also based on this idea of scientific management. And scientific management, if we talk about the industrial era, it goes back to this idea of Taylorism, which is just a scientific way of doing things, a replicable way of actually conducting business. So what we have in schools is this idea of structured authority. You have department chair, administrator, assistant, principal. We have principal. We have zone superintendent, we have superintendent or assistant superintendents, things like that. So we have this idea of a hierarchy and structure within the schools. We also have grade standardization so that we know what a is. If we're on a 10-point scale or a 7-point scale, we have that standard throughout so that a person doesn't get a grade in one class where the 90 is an A and then go to another class where the 90 is a B. So we have that. We also standardize instruction. And you all, if you're in the public school system, you understand that this is happening, whether you like it or not. It is part of this bureaucracy in schools. Another aspect that Weber is most famous known for is idea of groups, status groups. And belonging to a particular status group determines your level of importance, but also can provide a caste. You'd be foolish to believe that America is not a caste system. We're just sophisticated with our caste to the degree that we don't realize it's a caste system. But oftentimes these status groups are based upon merit and achievement. Sometimes they're based upon birthright. But the status group that you're in determines the level of success and your level of movement and social mobility. So, for example, if you are in general education, which means if you're in a school that has 3 tracks, honors, general ed, and let's say special ed. If you're in the general ed, it takes a ton of paperwork to get you to move up into the honors. Likewise, it takes a ton of paperwork to move you down to exceptional. If you are exceptional children, it takes a lot of paperwork and testing and all of these processes and procedures to actually move you out of the exceptional children's department and move you into general ed or even into honors. And sometimes it's almost unheard of that once you go into these particular social groups, you stay there. But also, the social mobility works to facilitate elite groups who don't have to do the things that everyone else does. So we create a level of elitism within groups. Even within working organizations, there are in-groups and out-groups. There are groups that are close to the CEO and the boss to where they may go play tennis on the weekends or play golf together, and you don't know these relationships. And on those particular grounds, on personal, social relationships, that's how people mobility actually takes place. So, we used to hear the thing in business, if you want to move up, you got to learn how to play golf because deals are made on the golf course. That's what we're talking about here. This level of social mobility is often based upon your closeness to the elite groups. And your relationship with elite groups determines how far you go within an organization. So it leads to this idea of career ladders. When people see you, recognize you as one of us, and bring you in, we actually promote you to do more. So that is how Weber understands and assesses schools. So with that said, I'll pause here and then come with your next video, which will talk about resistance and school climate. Thank you.